Valery Zaluzhnyi stated that the war could last until 2034 if the strategy is not changed. Trump's position has changed a lot recently, in particular regarding the supply of weapons to Ukraine. Predictions for the end of the war. To what extent will Trump be ready to carry out his threats after the end of the 50 days he gave Russia? We discuss all these issues with American political science, StephenMoore. Mr. Moore, nice to see you.
Great to see you. And I'm here in the U.S. Capitol, where I've been talking to Republicans for the last 3 weeks about what they're seeing, what they're hearing from the president. And so yeah, I think that what we're seeing right now is that this was inevitable, really, because we've got the irresistible force of Putin, who wants to take over all of Ukraine and the former countries of the Soviet Union and Eastern Europe, against the immovable object of Trump's desire to make the war end. So at some point, this is going to happen, and Vladimir Putin has repeatedly told Trump that he would cease fire, that he would do things to end the war, and then he's launched hundreds of drones and missiles into Ukraine. So Vladimir Putin has lost his credibility with Trump, and I think we're seeing the results of that.
Okay, we will talk about Vladimir Putin, but I'd like to start our conversation with the statement of Valery Zaluzhnyi. He says that the war could drag until 2034 if the strategy is not changed. In your opinion, who and what forces can fight until 2034?
Well, I think that the resilience of the Ukrainian people and the Ukrainian armed forces is well documented and seen, in stark relief right now. I think that Russia has a problem because they are spending themselves into oblivion. And right now, a Russian soldier, an entry-level soldier, gets twice in cash what a U.S. entry-level soldier is paid. And when you factor in that Russia's average monthly wage is 20% of America's, they're paying their soldiers 10 times what America's soldiers get for the same job. So that's not sustainable. And you've seen 20% interest rates in Russia. You've seen Vladimir Putin spend down his sovereign wealth fund to 20 to 30% of what it was before the war. And they're just making foolish decisions for their economy that are not sustainable. And I think that's going to be the key to making this war end.
Now we know that the United States and Europe decided to go another way and have concluded an agreement on weapons, most of which Ukraine will receive. Trump announced this. We do not have the details, nor we do not know what Europe's reaction will be in this issue. However, it seems that this is a good sign. What in this regard should Ukraine expect in the near future? What is your opinion?
Well, this is a very good sign because a lot of us, I'm a pro-Ukraine Republican. I've been in Ukraine since day 5 of the war. And I spent most of my time for the last 3 years talking to my former Republican colleagues on Capitol Hill about what I'm seeing there. And this has been a hard struggle with Trump. Trump needed to be educated on the fact that Putin is not a good partner for peace, and it's Putin that's standing in the way of peace, not the Ukrainians. And so we've arrived at that point. Unfortunately, the biggest obstacle among Trump's voters to sending weapons to Ukraine is the perception that Ukraine is a corrupt country and that the weapons and the money are being used to line politicians' pockets in Ukraine. And President Zelensky made the unfortunate decision to change the status of Nabu, which what that says in America is that, okay, he is autocratic and he is lining his pockets. Whether that's the truth or not, that is the message that it sends to Republican voters. So this was the wrong message at exactly the wrong time. So we're having, we had the wind at our backs with Trump. Now we're having to struggle again upstream.
I'd like to talk next about the people who surround Trump, and Trump's position is changing. This is happening not least thanks to Kellogg and Rubio. They believe that Ukraine is not being supplied with enough weapons. Those who support Ukraine are gradually becoming closer to Trump, and figures like Steve Witkoff seems to be fading into the background. Do you notice this trend?
Yeah, I would agree. I was with Lindsey Graham last week, and Lindsey Graham just said this: the tide is turning. And that's all you have to say. And what I think we need to realize is that with Trump, it's going to be a roller coaster because the anti-Ukraine voices in the White House are still around him. They just are falling out of favor. But again, we need to focus on not giving those people ammunition. And the perception that President Zelensky created by doing this thing with Nabu gives those people ammunition. And in it, again, the pro-Ukraine people were coming into favor. The anti-Ukraine people were coming out of favor. Now, what's happened is the anti-Ukraine people can say, look what Zelensky's doing. And it's just, it is really hard to swim against that.
Okay, let's talk about the China's influence on Russia as the way to end the war. The EU leaders called on Chinese President Xi Jinping to put pressure on Russia to stop the war against Ukraine. This is written by the publication Politico. How serious can the influence of Xi Jinping on Putin really be? Is he really the leader who can turn the tide of this war?
Yes, but he has said plainly that it is not in his interest to see this war end. Because if this war in Ukraine ends, then the American foreign policy and defense establishment can turn its gaze towards China. So many people here in Washington believe that China is the real problem, not Russia. And the fact is that China, Russia, Iran, and North Korea are all working together. So it's not just China, it's not just Russia. They're all allied. And so what you're going to see is Xi Jinping and China continue to do the things that they've been doing to support Russia in this war, because it is in Xi Jinping's interests to continue this war.
And we know that Putin, Trump, and Xi Jinping maybe will meet in China at the end of this summer. What do you think about the prospects of this meeting? What results should we expect?
Well, again, I don't think there's anything that you can say to Xi Jinping to make him less pro-Russian or less interested in prolonging this war, because he has his own plans. He has said, I want to be able to go into Taiwan by 2027. My friends in the U.S. military tell me that they are working on an accelerated timeline. They think he will go into Taiwan prior to that. So, we are in a global war right now. And up until President Trump started recognizing that Ukraine and Russia were a big part of a larger war that's going on, nobody was acting on that information except for our adversaries. So we are in a global war, and China, Russia, Iran, North Korea, it's all one force. So I think it is going to be difficult to peel China away from Russia or Russia away from China.
Okay, so continuing this topic, and I'd like to talk about the Russia-Chinese relations, about that article that built a newspaper writes that Russia and China are preparing a double strike, so named. China will attack Taiwan and Russia will attack Europe, and this may happen supposedly in 2027. How do you assess this focus, and in what situation will the United States find itself in this focus becomes a reality?
Well, the U.S. right now is, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you. Go ahead.
Please, please.
Okay. So the U.S. right now is living under the illusion that peace and prosperity is their birthright. And they feel like they don't need to do anything to protect it. And they don't need to do anything to preserve their prosperity. But they're going to find out, I think, that we're in a fight and we're going to have to fight. And let me tell you how I think that's going to come about. As you well know, the Russians are going on human safaris in Kherson and hunting civilians with drones. And as the Ukrainians so brilliantly showed with Operation Spiderweb, you can smuggle a significant number of kamikaze drones into Russia. America's borders are not as secure as Russia. And in fact, there was a Wagner Group fighter who was apprehended on January 4th of this year, coming across the border with 2 passports, $4,000 in cash, and a drone in his backpack. So what I can see is that Chinese, Russian sleeper cells in America prepare hundreds or thousands of drones. And when Russia makes a big attack on Ukraine and China makes a big attack on Taiwan, there's a big attack on the U.S. homeland using this sort of Operation Spiderweb methodology.
And how do you think this West 2025 military exercises that's planned in Belarus, is this a real threat to other European countries, to the NATO members? What is your opinion?
Well, in January 2022, I called my Ukrainian friends from the United States and said, what do you think? Do you think Putin's going to invade? I couldn't find anyone who thought that Putin was going to invade. So I think that that Ukrainians, that Americans, and that Europeans need to take any sort of military exercise like that, at face value. It's a military making moves towards Europe. And at any point, they could strike. So, what we've seen historically is a failure of imagination in several countries, the United States, Ukraine, about the things that could happen to them. Pearl Harbor, 9/11 in the United States. Nobody saw those things coming. And what is the next event like that that's going to trigger a massive war?
Let's talk about the Ukrainian counteroffensive. Is it possible Trump, in the conversation with Volodymyr Zelensky, in the nearest conversation, called for offensive actions? The Washington Post writes about this, and to what extent, in your opinion, does Trump have the desire and red lines to end this war?
Trump wants to end the war. The people around him want this war to end because they see China as the real threat. And so Trump is recognizing that, the Ukrainian military is incredibly brave, incredibly capable, innovative, creative. And if they're just armed with the right weapons, they can push Russia back. And so, Trump wants to back a winner. And the truth is, Putin is a loser. The Ukrainians, which have a navy that is ranked 37th out of 39 ranked navies in the world, has pushed the Russian Navy out of the Black Sea. You look at Operation Spiderweb, where they took $100,000 worth of drones and they did away with $7 billion worth of strategic bombers. And, so the Ukrainian military is the winner, and Putin is just a loser. His economy is crumbling. He's lost 1 million soldiers. And that message needs to get to Trump because Trump likes backing a winner.
Speaking of counteroffensive, is it obvious to everyone that Ukraine needs weapons for this? But the Europe sometimes have different opinion, and is Europe ready to purchase enough weapons for Ukraine right now for counteroffensive? I would like to know your opinion about the last statements of European leaders.
Well, I think you got to define Europe, because when you look at the Baltic stations, when you look at the Baltic countries, when you look at the Nordic countries, when you look at the UK, and there's a bunch of brave, courageous European countries that are willing to do the right thing. And then there's France and Belgium and Spain, and the Western European countries and the Southern European countries are far more interested in buying cheap natural gas from Russia than they are in aiding Ukraine for its victory. If you look at France by itself, they spent enough money on liquid natural gas with Russia to fund every Shahed drone that Russia has sent into Ukraine. I don't know when the last time you were in Donetsk, but I didn't see any Leclerc tanks when I was there. So, and France has even opted out of President Trump's efforts to get NATO to pay for weapons for Ukraine. So, and look at Belgium. Belgium has $250 billion in frozen Russian assets, and they've done next to nothing with them since 2022. So, so Europe is not a credible partner in NATO, and again, half of Europe is not a credible partner. You got some people that are really overperforming. So, Ukraine has problems with America. Ukraine has problems with Europe, and I just hope we can get them all resolved.
I'd like to hear your opinion how Russia will be really ready to make peace under pressure. Is peace through force the only option? How do you think about what do you think about the peace through force?
Yeah, I think that Vladimir Putin will continue to fight in Ukraine and Europe as long as he is allowed to. And the ways that we can show him that he shouldn't be fighting in Ukraine and Europe is through force, through destroying more of his army, destroying more of his weapons, his vehicles, his tanks. And the other way is we can, put the economic screws to him. And right now we've got a lot of sanctions. There's no shortage of sanctions. What there is a shortage of enforcement. So I think that President Trump's idea of massive secondary tariffs, if you buy natural gas from Russia, if you buy oil from Russia, we're going to tear up your economy. And I think that is something that could be effective. Or frankly, there's 1,000 ships in Russia's shadow fleet that go out into the Indian Ocean and meet Chinese and Indian tankers and offload their products at a price above the sanctions limit. And just a U.S. destroyer pulling up next to one of those tankers would send a big message. So I think that we have to look at ways to bring Vladimir Putin's economic and military footprint down.
And I'd like to talk with you about the process inside Ukraine. In Ukraine, people in Ukraine came out to protest against the adoption of Law 12-141. In Russia, the media tried to tell something about our process, but very quickly fell silent. This is because in Russia such protests are something insinkable and impossible. What do you know about Europe's reaction to this Ukrainian law and the protests of Ukrainians? Could the situation with the adoption of this law affect European-Ukrainian relations?
Yeah, I think that, so President Zelensky says there's Russian influence inside Nabu, and I don't have any information whether that is the case or not. But unless that Russian influence is about to break out of the building and run amok in Kyiv and kill a lot of people, then this was a poorly timed effort to do that, because right now we desperately need weapons in Ukraine from America and Europe. And I've been, again, on Capitol Hill for the last 3 weeks. I've been in the heartland of America, in Iowa and Oklahoma, talking to Republicans, talking to conservatives. And without fail, they just say, I just hate to send more money to Ukraine because I just think Ukraine's a corrupt country and our hard-earned tax money is going down the toilet by sending it there. And that is the number one objection among Trump's voters to sending weapons to Ukraine. And listen, there's a perception that Donald Trump doesn't need to listen to anybody, but he needs to listen to his supporters. He needs to listen to his voters. And that's what his voters are telling him. And the unfortunate timing of this effort to rearrange Nabu is sending the wrong message. It is sending the wrong message for getting weapons to Ukraine. I think the Europeans have made that clear. I think that what we're seeing on Capitol Hill is that it's pretty clear that this was poorly timed if our goal is to get weapons to Ukraine.
Mr. Moore, thank you for this interesting and informative conversation. I'd like to ask the viewers, if you liked this video, to mark it with a like and subscribe to our channel. My pleasure to remind you that my guest today was political scientist StephenMoore. Thank you.
And let me just say, my website is Ukraine Freedom Project. I'd welcome your viewers to go to our website and check out what we're doing.
Thank you. Thank you for support Ukraine.
Thank you. Great to be with you.
Thank you.